I'm Allie Barefoot with Cotality, and this is Data and Context. Today we're going to be exploring a very crucial topic in the home buying journey, bidding wars. We're going to be breaking down new research from Steve Choi, an assistant professor of real estate finance from the Rochester Institute of Technology. His study dove deep into mortgage defaults and lower annualized returns using Cotality data to uncover what bidding wars means for financial outcomes. And his findings are very relevant today as the housing market is actually shifting from a seller's market to a buyer's market for the first time in 5 years. As we do head into that buyer's market, though, bidding wars may not be as important as they used to be. In fact, they may disappear overall as inventory increases and gives buyers the upper hand. But it does raise a really important question for those that have already purchased under pressure. How do bidding wars affect affordability and long-term financial security? So, to get into it, let's go on ahead and jump into the questions with Steve. Steve, thank you so much for joining us here in Data and Context.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation. Really a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. You sent us a research paper that was brilliant, honestly. It dealt with a lot on bidding wars and how that really shapes a home buyer's journey. And you and I can be honest, the home buyer journey over the last 5-10 years, it's been a little up and down. There's a lot of things that go into it. And we know that the U.S. housing markets have had a lot of highs and a lot of lows, especially over perhaps the last 3 years as interest rates have really started to take over. So one way that people have been able to secure the homes they want is simply by overbidding that price that they see on the for sale sign. But how common was this tactic of overbidding? And are bidding wars less common now than they were a few years ago?
Yes, so in our study, we look at Cotality's data over about 40 million single-family detached home transactions. And if you look at sort of time series of a bidding war, where a bidding war is defined in our study as a transaction that's sold above asking price, you see that actually reaching around 50% in 2021 or so. So I would say that immediately after pandemic, that on average there was 1 in 2 homes, 1 in 3 homes in between that was going through the bidding wars. Recently that has cooled down. So if you look at one of the Cotality reports of 10 things to know, about the mortgage and housing markets that came out in August, that number has sort of gone down to about 34% in June of 2024. So things have been kind of easing recently.
Right. And I know that the title of your research paper is The Winner's Curse. But my main question here is, why is a bidding war considered a winner's curse? And how is it affecting current and future home buyers?
Right. So when you buy a house in a bidding war, I think that there's a lot of sort of heated emotion, a lot of sort of attachment that goes into transaction. Where you might have thought about, well, I think this house is fairly priced at a certain price point, but then there are a lot of bidding going on. Perhaps you're tired of getting back to the search again, and also the inventories are just not that much. So you ultimately get into this overpayment, right? Sort of bidding up, and say, hey, I want that last final stretch to get the key. And once that's done, unfortunately, I think there are potential consequences, which is, adverse financial consequences of overpayment. So when you overpay something relative to a fair price, then you will ultimately get a lower return, right? So when you liquidate down the road, you'll realize a lower return on that house. But also that's also means that you're taking effectively a larger mortgage, and sort of your loan to value ratio will be also higher. So you're more likely to default and not make full on the promises on the mortgage itself. So those are the two main winner's curse effects that we find in our study using the Cotality data.
Right, and you mentioned that inventory was low when these buyers are looking for a home. So when you do finally find a home that you want, you see the price is something affordable, you're obviously not the only people that are seeing that same type of price and home that they want. So therefore, the bidding war does commence. And you noted in your research that when buyers go into this bidding war, they're essentially paying 8.2% over price for a house. But now that we are shifting to a buyer's market, that inventory is increasing. Finally, do you expect future home buyers will still face that same risk of overpaying, or will the competitive pressures, begin to ease?
Yeah, so I think it's going to have probably more of a dichotomous results. So where it's a highly coveted neighborhoods with great amenities and also, great school districts, I think there will be still a dormant group of home buyers who are looking at cautiously federal, rates coming down by the Federal Reserve, but also, looking at the 30-year fixed mortgage rate, in the Freddie Mac. So I think there is a group of potential dormant buyers, home buyers, who will be jumping into sustaining that heightened competition. But also, on the other hand, many of the markets, I think we will see a lot of homes on the inventory, longer days on market, and also cooling down of the prices generally. So you will see less of a bidding war, less of people queuing in the open houses, and so forth. So I think it will be a bit of polarized, a little bit stratified. You will see certain areas that are still maintaining some bidding wars, but generally, on average, you will see ease of that.
Right. And, this buyer's market is going to be a little bit different. We know that Cotality data is showing us this is the first real buyer's market since 2008 to 2011. But there's still that struggle with affordability, and that has a lot to do with interest rates being so high. And we know that a buyer's market means higher inventory and falling prices, like you just mentioned. But right now, is it truly beneficial for buyers to purchase that home? When do you expect interest rates to reach a level that is meaningful to buyers and actually affordable to make it really feel like we're in a buyer's market?
Yeah, so thanks for that question, Allie, because I think that is sort of nice follow-up question of building up of our previous discussion, where it's not the affordability. It's not just a matter of heightened or cooling down of competition, but also closely related to the cost of financing. So if you look at as of the first week of October, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate averaged about 6.34%. On Freddie Mac, and which is nudging actually a little bit higher week over week. And also Mortgage Bankers Association's 2025 projection are about 6.5%. So we're lingering around that 6%, lower 6% area. And I think to have a material impact for home buyers to say, hey, this is going to be the moving the needle, I think we would have to look at somewhere like 100 basis points. So, somewhere if the mortgage rates come down to, 5.5%. So if you do a back of the envelope calculation, let's say on $400,000 loan, going from 6.34% to 6% saves about $90 per month, as opposed to if you do a hypothetical scenario of a 6.34% down to 5.5%, it's about $215 per month. So to move the needle, I think that the about 100 basis points should come down on the 30-year fixed. And when that will happen, at the current trajectory, I think many of them are expected to have it maybe mid to late 2026. So for the current buyer, I think there's still room for refinance if you already have purchased and looking to refinance, then that might be a good time to consider. For future buyers, if you could stay a little bit tighter until 2026 ends, you might be in a better position to capitalize a more favorable mortgage rate.
Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind. I'm currently looking for a home right now and might have to wait until maybe next holiday season of when we're moving out of that apartment. But you mentioned that it comes down to just numbers in the sense of how much you're saving per month and with these interest rates. But then also when you tackle on top of that already overbidding for the house, that's got to add more money at the end of the day. And Cotality data found that home buyers need an additional $200,000 compared to 10 years ago to close on a median price home. And when you add that bidding war equation into that, that's about another $33,000 on a median price home of, let's say, $400 to $5,000. So that's a big addition when you're adding on that big chunk of money just to secure the home. So did your research show how overpayment can affect homeownership long term?
Yes. So in our Cotality data that looks over about 2 decades, so from 2000 to 2018, we found that the annual sort of the holding period, average holding period is about over 6 years. So and there's also recently on topic of mortgage lock-in. So many of them are holding on to their lower mortgage rates that were locked in right around when the COVID started. So if you think that that's even going to make the average holding period longer for these folks, I think that the if you actually did overpay, then it might exacerbate the winner's curse effect, which is realizing lower annualized return and sort of also higher default. And I think we need to take a look at this in the context of also labor market, so job numbers, and both the interest rates. So interest rates are responding to both inflation and job numbers, and recently there has been also softening job market. And I think that if you think about these general macroeconomic conditions that could bring an income shock, right? So unemployment or just being laid off, that could also exacerbate sort of that the long-term winner's curse effect. And I think another component is the climate risk. So we kind of looked at the the Cotality reports has also rising insurance and also taxes on these. So if, for example, that you overpaid and subsequently your appraisal value also follows and anchors that value, your property tax is going to increase over years. So that's going to put a strain on your cash flow. Also certain areas like in California and Florida, coastal areas where you have a disaster-prone risks, then your insurance premium will also go up. So there are a lot of factors that in the long run that could really squeeze your cash flow cushion. And we just need to be really careful for, regarding the overpayment. Yeah.
And you made a great point there about it really depends on location of the home as well, because if you are in possibly a natural disaster area, that may not attract as many buyers as to say a home that's not in a prone natural disaster area. And you mentioned it earlier that Cotality data shows that we saw the number of days of homes linger on the market. It rose by double digits, which suggests that sellers are relisting homes at a high price to recoup those costs. So is keeping affordability out of reach even as we move towards a buyer's market if somebody is trying to raise their prices on their home, if it necessarily isn't worth that price per se?
I believe that in the long run that the market will adjust to make that repricing adjusted downward. In other words, if you relisted too high of a price as a seller, then you really won't have that many people lining up in the open house or submitting a bid, if you will, compared to post-pandemic market. So this means that that many of the sellers will have to readjust, putting their prices even down, right? And that could also elongate the market, the days on market. So overall, it could send a very bad signal regarding the property that you're putting on. So you just want to be really careful of relisting at a higher price. And in terms of affordability, I believe that even though relisting a high price could squeeze affordability issue, if the market adjusts in the long run, basically making those home sellers ultimately adjust downward their prices, I think that could ease a little bit. And we already see that in being in a buyer's market where there were substantially more houses on the market, fewer sellers, and a negotiation sort of power, changing that tide towards the buyers. Yeah.
Right. It's almost like using the best terminology to market your house to the buyers who have a plethora of options to choose from, hopefully, as inventory continues to increase. But we also know that the purchase is one half seller, one half buyer. So from the buyer's perspective, we actually have a survey here at Cotality, the From House to Home survey, where we found that nearly half of home buyers expected their real estate agent to guide them through the home buying process to really find that right home. But with the upcoming buyer's market, how can real estate agents help the buyer in making sure they're not overbidding, just like you said, how they can help the sellers kind of maximize the terms and maybe not list their home too high in price? How can they help the buyer?
Yes. So I think one of the ways is to show some of the anecdotal evidence that in the post-pandemic, how many bids were coming in, as opposed to recent transactions that the agent might have carried out, to show that the current market condition is not as same as the seller's market post-pandemic. So giving this kind of salience, guidance to the buyers and also sellers, I think that makes sort of the information and the market conditions more realistic and pragmatic to both players in the market. So one of that would be sort of educational, providing guidance. Hey, there's this wake-up call where the buyer's market's really kind of becoming more average nowadays, and we need to be prepared to do so. And I think the other thing is just maximizing exposure. I think post-pandemic, I pointed out that there were languages and strategies where it instigated more competition, and it sort of restricted the time to submit the bid. And these kind of strategies are can be dangerous and risky in the current buyer's market. So I think for from the agent's perspective to walk through looking at the comparable sales in the neighborhood and looking at sort of their times of market, and to provide some realistic coaching and guidance to both sellers and buyers, I think that will be helpful to both market participants.
Thank you again, Steve. This has been extremely insightful, and thank you so much for joining us on Data and Context. You're actually the first expert on the outside of Cotality that has joined us, and hopefully not the last. This has been incredible.
Thank you very much, Allie, for the invitation, and it was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for listening. And once again, thank you to Professor Steve Choi. If you haven't already, go on ahead, hit that subscribe button on Cotality's YouTube page, drop a comment, and hit that like button. And if you guys want to find out even more information, as always, head to cotality.com.